everyone for joining us. And without wasting much time, I would like to first introduce our guest, that is Dr. J.P. Narayan sir. Before that, yes, I would like to introduce myself. Mosmi Kirtania, and I am the present president of the Youth for Inclusive and Sustainable Society. Yes, so I'd like to take the honor to welcome our guest of our event. Dr. JP sir is an Indian liberal politician and activist. He is the founder and president of the Loksatta party. He also served as a member of the Legislative Assembly from Kukatpalli constituency of AP. And he is a former Indian public administrator and physician by education. He is the founder and general secretary of Foundation for Democratic Reforms, that is an NGO, and independent public policy think tank and research resource center. He is also a political reformer and columnist. He is well known for his role in electoral reforms and right to information, that is RTI Act. He has also written columns in Indian newspapers such as the Times of India, Economic Times, Financial Express, The Hindu, and hosted television shows covering elections and politics such as Pratidhwani, and also acts as a mentor to Vision India Foundation. Some of the political and administrative reforms I would like to address. He has served on the following panels, and they are the National Advisory Council for the implementation of the National Common Minimum Program in July 2004 through August 2006. Vigilance Advisory Council constituted by the Central Vigilance Commission in November 2004. Second Administrative Reforms Commission constituted by the Government of India in September 2005, and National Rural Health Mission of India Task Force in 2005 to 2007. Once again, thank you sir for joining us today. Next, I would like to introduce another member of our team, Mr. Kiran Kumar. I request JP sir to please come on the stage and take his seat. Next, I would like to introduce one of the member of our team, that is Mr. Kiran Kumar. He has pursued MA in Political Science from University of Hyderabad, and now he is pursuing PhD in Political Science from University of Hyderabad itself. And he is interested to work in the domains of politics, public policy and governance. His strengths are his strong academic background with intense ground level research experience, and he is working on sustainable development goals and is striving for an inclusive, just and equitable society. He has also worked as a coordinator for APM Telangana, BC Times and Ashoka Political Data Center from January 2016 to December 2020 as a research analysis for social profiling of elected representatives of APM Telangana. He has also published nearly 12 articles in national and state newspapers on political and policy issues. He has also attended 4 international conferences on public policy and governance in Singapore and Canada. And next he is going to present also in Budapest, Poland in the month of June. So I request Mr. Kiran Kumar to join with JP sir.
Thank you, Mosmi. We already informed everyone that this is an interactive session, so we will request JP Garu to address the gathering for 10-15 minutes. Then we will open the session for interaction.
Thank you, Kiran. My apologies for being late. Actually, I was ready by 4 o'clock. I had a problem with the driver today because somebody died in his family. I don't have a second driver. I was waiting for the car and it took time. It's actually a good starting point for our discussion. We speak a great deal about injustice, inequality by birth, social justice, and so on and so forth. But in the past 72 years now, after the Republic has been founded, have we really done what is necessary to ensure equality of opportunity? We have chosen two paths. One is reservation for the disadvantaged sections. While there are some difficulties in the reservation model, it is necessary. And the second is social welfare, giving short-term relief to people in various states, and thus increasing of late. Both are necessary, but they do not address the real challenge of equality of opportunity. We are pretending that we are solving the problem of poverty or inequality by both these measures. That is the central theme for me today. You take the short-term measurements or measures taken to alleviate the suffering. It is necessary in a desperately poor country, because if a hungry person is there, you must first fill the belly, no question about it. But in the guise of that, the governments limit themselves only to short-term freebies without enhancing human capacity or productivity or earning ability, is nothing but perpetuation of poverty and caste discrimination. And that's what's happening in India. So what are the things we need to do, in my judgment? The first is rule of law. A real rule of law. On paper, normatively, India has rule of law. Constitutionally, the law applies to everybody equally. But in reality, I'm sure as university students, you have some understanding, even if you have no experience. But if you go to a police station on any given day to get any kind of redressal for a problem, or you go to government office to get something that is your entitlement, you pay a fee, you want a certificate, or you want something else which is your right, then you'll understand there is no rule of law in India. It's only on paper. Or if you or somebody from your family or friends is arrested for a minor infraction, some minimal misdemeanor, the way they are treated, or if there is some justice you are seeking, because there is some problem where your rights are violated, therefore you go to a court of law, the kind of harassment and the delay you have to go through, that make you understand that there is no real rule of law in this country. Rule of law is particularly necessary for the weak, not for the strong. It's necessary for everybody. But in a society devoid of rule of law, might will be right. The strong will always prevail. The poor and the weak will always lose out. That is the logic of failure of rule of law. It will ultimately hurt the rich also. But it will only ultimately hurt the rich inadvertently, because if there is lawlessness on the streets, inadvertently rich person may be hurt. But the real hurt is to the poor. When I go for the walks in the morning to KBR Park, I see scores of people there, desperately poor and hungry people, waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, getting ready and then going to the local market and then buying some vegetables and fruits and flowers and so on and so forth. And then by 5:30 they come to this KBR Park. Several hours they sit there and they try to sell their wares. All that to make a precarious living. If their rights are not protected, for instance, if there is bribery on a daily basis for the hawkers and vegetable vendors and these sellers of the fruits and other things every day, the people who are affected are the poorest of the poor, who are only trying to eke out a precarious livelihood. So rule of law is a first critical requirement for giving reasonable opportunity and dignity. We have failed spectacularly in India. There are 35 million cases pending in courts, many of them for decades. World over, as economies become more modern, civil cases outnumber criminal cases because there will be a lot of disputes, property, business, financial transactions, all kinds of stuff. India is the sole exception. 2/3 of the cases pending in courts are criminal cases. Because civil cases, people don't even bother to go to court because they know it's not worthwhile. They suffer injustice silently. I can go on and on. 70% of the people in prisons are under trials who are not convicted yet. And they languish in prisons only because they don't have a lawyer, they can't afford the money, and they are the poorest of the poor. Let me stop at that for rule of law. The second basic thing is empower the people as locally as possible. Because then the voice of the collective can be felt. but empower in a responsible way, in an innovative way. Not the traditional villages which are the dens of casteism, but aggregate the villages, focus on small towns, and empower the community so that the collective can actually assert themselves and make things happen locally. In local governments, we have vast reservations, about 75% reservation. All the disadvantaged sections and women together, reservations are about 75%. But there is zero empowerment. You really empower the local communities in a very responsible way. Slowly but steadily, the democratic assertion of the numbers will take place. Rights will be effectively enforced. Amenities will improve. People will learn the art of democracy because local governments are schools for democracy. Their vote will not be bought easily then because they will see what is the gain of the taxes. And if I put Kiran in place or somebody else competent and good in place, what happens? If I put somebody bad, what happens? I see the result clearly. Right now in a centralized system, people don't understand what happens. It doesn't matter you're a saint or a sinner. When they voted for me out of heroism, out of a sense of romance. Not because they understood what I could do differently from others, because really speaking, there's nothing I could do differently from others. I could do a little bit, but it's not so tangible that people can feel the difference, because the system is all perverted and highly centralized. But if you elect a local person, and everything that happens locally that matters to you in life is determined by that person, then you understand where my vote is going, what is happening to my life, where my tax money is going, what's happening to my life, and I mature as a Democrat, as a citizen, as a voter. I always give the example of the apartment where I live. Now all of us pay monthly maintenance charge. We all elected somebody to take care of the apartment complex. Now supposing the elevator does not function, I don't get water supply in the house, I'm not going to keep quiet. I'll holler from rooftops because that's the most important thing for me. I need water supply. I need the elevator to function, the lift to function. If that chap says, look, Dr. JP, I'll give you 100 rupees or 1,000 rupees a month, keep quiet, I'll slap him. Because the elevator functioning and the water supply coming to the house and watch and ward and parking in the apartment complex, they are far more important than the 1,000 rupees. And two, I know that I am paying maintenance charge to him. He didn't pay anything to me. I am supporting the work that he is doing. I understand it clearly. Because it's local, in front of my eyes, and I see the consequences of his doing something right or not doing something right. By failing to create this model, by centralizing government and making elections a jamboree, we created a system where voter is completely dealing from governance except on the day of election. And therefore vote became a purchasable commodity. When there is no consequence I can understand as a voter to my vote, all right, I might as well sell the vote. Or I fall prey to freebies because I'm dissatisfied as a voter. The fellows who are coming to power with my vote and spending my tax money, they pretend as if they're the benefactors and they give me something. And they give me freebies. I give you freebies, free that. But they will not allow me to fulfill my potential. That brings me to the topic of today. Education and healthcare. You are some of the brightest kids in this country. You are also somewhat privileged and lucky because your parents took care, they sacrificed a great deal. You had initial advantage of some relatively better schooling. Some have had much better schooling, some not so good, but still compared to other kids, relatively better schooling. You had some teachers who early on gave you some opportunity, some chance, and therefore you are now here in one of the better universities of the country. But I'm sure you're aware of what's happening to 90% of the kids in the country, at least 80% of the kids in this country, either schools or colleges. Our education for 80% kids is a sham. It is a fraud. They have no future. They have no realistic opportunity. Not because they are not smart. They are as bright as anybody else sitting here. They just did not have the chance. I went to a village school in Telugu medium, government school. Both primary school, in those days what we call Panchayat Samiti school, the block school, and the high school, so-called high school up to 10th grade, Jilla Parishad High School. All of us, many of us in those days, despite relative poverty, inadequate resources, poor infrastructure, we all got a chance. The schools mattered. Education was important. Many of us could come out of that and could make an impact all over the world, hundreds of thousands of them. Today, the kids who are going to the same schools that we went to, I can tell you with absolute certainty, the infrastructure is better, wages are higher, there are more teachers, all kinds of things are happening, but they don't have a ghost of a chance in life. Because our education is a disaster. 50% of kids between 14 and 18, 50%, they cannot look at a watch and read time. My watch now shows 7 minutes, 6 o'clock, 7 minutes past 6. About 70-80% are able to say 6 o'clock thereabout. But it is 6 hours, 7 minutes, only 50% are able to say between ages of 14 and 18 in a country where everybody is supposed to be enrolled in schools. About 40 to 50% cannot measure weights. You go to a market and you want to weigh, let's say, 2.5 kgs of brinjal. You do not know what weights to put to get 2.5 kgs of brinjal. And of course, understanding the concepts of doing simple mathematical operations, the less said the better. So what I'm talking about is not some grandiose issue. I'm not talking of some fantastic area. I'm talking of the basic skills required to navigate through life. How can you ever end poverty or discrimination by birth or give opportunity without these elementary skills, without education doing its basic job? And these kids, because inflated marks in third-rate examinations where either rote learning or rampant mass copying are enough to get good grades, they finish school, they get certification, grace marks, this, that, and then they go into colleges. They get college degrees. Most of them are not worth the paper on which they are printed. And poverty is perpetuated. Only those who have advantages of early schooling because the parents are all educated, they have some level of economic comfort, and they went to, among the schools, better schools. Private sector is as bad as public sector. It's not public or private. Schools all over are bad, but high-end private schools, some of them are a little bad. That's all. So they go to slightly better schools, and somebody is paying attention, and therefore some of them flourish. Only 1% of Indian kids meet global standards. 1%. About 15-20%, with some effort, they can try and get by. 80% have no chance. These are hard, real numbers. And expenditure is not the problem. Even today I was doing some study. In India, only about 65% of the kids are in government schools, 35% private schools, and that number is increasing. The numbers in government schools are decreasing, in private schools increasing. Considering that, we're actually spending more than the other countries for school education. Andhra Pradesh spends 90,000 rupees per child per year. I don't know if you're aware. Telangana spends 65,000 rupees. Many other states spend 50, 60, 70. Some of the poorer states spend about 35 to 40,000 rupees per child per year. More is welcome, but more money is not the answer. Making the money work for these kids and their future, that we are not doing. And finally, healthcare. I started off with a real story of somebody in my driver's family passing away, and therefore is not available to me today, and I had to be late here. If you actually see how many poor people are remaining poor because of healthcare problems, or their lives are cut short, or their productivity is undermined, therefore they cannot work, or they are forced to take up a big loan or sell their assets, you will understand how healthcare and poverty are linked. 6 crore Indians, 60 million Indians are becoming poor in India every year because of healthcare problems. The numbers vary. Some studies say 54 million, some say 60 million. You pick your number, I don't mind. When I first discovered this some 20-25 years ago, I didn't realize this because we all think of poverty line as a stable one. And every year, indeed, as economy grows, some people do come out of poverty. But that is a net number. There are also many people getting into poverty, descending into poverty because they are on the margins of survival. When you are in the margins of survival, a 10,000 rupee additional expenditure suddenly makes you poor when you are not poor according to our calculation. Because our calculation of poverty is a very simple one. If you are able to eat 2,500 calories of food, you are no longer poor. If you can buy and eat 2,500 calories of food, You are not poor. That is our Niti Aayog Planning Commission value. Nothing wrong. Some standard, as long as the standard is uniformly understood, that's okay. But it will no longer be valid in a country where food security is no longer a real issue. We have to change that. But the point is, people who are not poor in the beginning of the year, they are descending into poverty by the end of the year because of healthcare problems. 60 million people. COVID caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. We all, quite understandably, were deeply distressed. World over it happened. India also it happened. But do you know, in India, every year, 7.5 lakh children are dying below 5 years of age. Almost all of them are preventable deaths. The average lifespan of the poorer communities and poorer families is definitely much less than those who are better off. The devastation on account of poor healthcare is something very palpable in the country, unless you have no eyes to see and no heart to respond. The good news is, education, you don't require to spend much more money, you have to spend it more wisely. Some money is required, but not much money. We're already spending significant amounts. I told you already, a large proportion of Indian students are in private sector. University level, 50% are in private sector. Public expenditure is only for those in government sector, right? So considering that our expenditure is meeting global standards, the standard prescription given by education is to spend more money, 6% GDP. That is not the challenge. When 90,000 rupees is spent on school education in Andhra Pradesh per child, and the kids are not really getting an advantage in life, then the question is not spending another 1 lakh rupees, but what's happening to 90,000 rupees? Where are these kids not getting the opportunity? Of late, some governments are taking interest in school infrastructure. Telangana announced 8,900 crores or something recently. AP is doing something equally similar. But it all looks nice, but it makes no difference, because the challenge is not putting more money for school buildings. You put more money, I'm not opposed to that, but don't pretend that it's solving the problem. The challenge is outcomes. Is the kid capable of dealing with the world? Can the kid be an economically productive person? Make an earning, an honest and honorable living for herself? Can the kid fulfill her potential? And at higher level, can the kid be a better citizen? Can the kid be a better community leader? And can the kid be a better human being? Even if that is taken apart, the basic skills required to be able to play a creative role in a modern economy, they are missing for most people. So my broader argument is, unless we focus on quality education, doesn't require much more money, just redesign the way it is done. And quality healthcare requires money because we are underspending in healthcare. We are spending just about 1% GDP, whereas there is no country on earth which is spending 1% GDP. We are the lowest. And 75% of the expenditure in healthcare is out of pocket. Again, we are the highest in the world. Almost all of it actually out of pocket, because insurance hardly touches a small number of people in India. And that's not the answer for it. I don't have time to go into details. That cannot be the answer for a country in any case. So you have to put more money. But even that, luckily, you don't require to put astronomical sums. Other countries spend 5%, 6%, 9%, 10% GDP. Government spend. We are spending 1%. Just 0.5% or so, but properly spent. If you deploy it intelligently, innovatively, that will substantially improve the quality of healthcare available to the bulk of the people of the country. Because we have many advantages. We have doctors and nurses in large numbers. Our pharma industry and vaccine industry is a world champion. We have the capacity to generate outcomes comparable to global standards at the lowest cost in the world. We have many advantages. If you leverage them skillfully, with just about 0.5% or a little around that spent by the government, union and state put together, but spent differently, intelligently, we can eliminate all this pain of ill health and minimize or eliminate the people descending into poverty on account of poor health care. So my appeal is these 4 things: rule of law, local governments, education, healthcare. If we understand the meaning and ensure the quality is available to everybody, that is the way to provide an opportunity for equality. That is the way for fairness and justice. That is the way to eliminate discrimination by birth. Without focusing on them, we pretended, let me conclude, that mere reservation and short-term freebies are sufficient. That is the nature of our politics today. All politics centered on these 2 things, ignoring the real things that matter to our lives. and our future. When our friends asked me to participate, I was happy because if you, the students of some of the better universities in the country, the privilege of education, if you don't look at these things deeply, if you simply indulge in the traditional sloganeering and the standard hackneyed phrases of Indian public discourse, the shibboleths that we hear day in and day out, the disgusting, insincere shibboleths we hear day in and day out, then there's a tragedy for the country. And luckily, the time is right for the country because we have the technology, we have the resources, we have the opportunity. More and more people are waking up. And I want you to do this thinking and question whatever I say. Don't take it at face value. Question it, challenge it, research it, study it, find better ways of doing it. But for heaven's sake, let us change the way we take care of ourselves and therefore our future. I wish you all the very best. I leave it to you to raise some questions. Thank you.
Sir, before opening for their question and answers round, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Maybe you can give answers. So, what actually the idea of justice for you for this contemporary India? Like, can you see it only social justice or economic justice, or economic justice within the sociological and sociological groups?
It's hard to distinguish, to separate rule of law itself, the narrow notion of justice and fairness. Economic justice, that's what I discussed today, opportunity to grow and therefore participate in economic activity and raise income level with dignity. Not because somebody is charitable, not because I'm a mendicant accepting some giveaways from somebody, but having the dignity and the confidence and the opportunity myself. And of course, social justice in the sense that the appropriate social legislation to eliminate the traditional norms of society, caste discrimination, untouchability, etc. You cannot separate these. My broader argument is the social part of it, while there is still a practice of social discrimination because of caste, in reality, particularly in terms of marriage and in many other activities, that is a societal issue. And existing laws, they do exist. Law works up to a point. Ultimately, the day India will eliminate caste is the day when all of you have the courage of conviction for your own personal selves, not about public good, that you choose your life partners on the basis of who is most compatible, who gives you happiness rather than whether he or she belongs to so-and-so caste. That day will one day come. It's getting better because caste is embedded in our society and is perpetuated because of marriages which are endogamous. That's not something that the law can force. With urbanization, with modernization, I'm hoping that your generation and your successors will increasingly choose life partners responsibly, but for your own happiness. If that person happens to be born in a community in which you are born, so be it. I'm not saying you must deliberately choose somebody outside your community, but don't let this be the major consideration. Then eventually caste will go. So let us leave that aside. But economic justice and the rule of law justice cannot be separated. That's why I combine these two. And political justice is about genuine empowerment and local governments. So you cannot delink them. But at the heart of it, in today's world, paisa mein paramatma hai. If you have the true earning capacity, if you have the ability to create wealth and to garner wealth honestly, not by appropriation, but by creating wealth, then other discrimination will eventually cease. We have to fight on all fronts, but we cannot ignore this front without giving the earning capacity, and that means fulfilling human potential. Because the basic premise in this is that everybody is endowed by creator or nature with a lot of talent. Kids are not given brains because of caste or family. They exist. Of course, it's non-uniform, but in a broad sense, equitable brains are available in nature. If you don't allow that mind to flourish, to flower, that capacity to be fulfilled, the potential to be fulfilled, that capacity to be enhanced, then inequality will continue to grow. So while we cannot divide all these, whatever tools we have available in the hands of the state and the public policy to end discrimination and to provide opportunity, we must use them to the full.
So second question is on education system. We have two kinds of models emerging in the country. One Delhi-based model where everyone appreciating the model of education by KG1. And we have on other side of the country, we have some of the, as you mentioned rightly, another model is also emerging like Amavadi, which you are also critic of it because of many reasons. But there are so much of spending on Amavadi and the kind of model that is emerging. So can you differentiate both? Maybe taking Delhi model as one of the.
Amma Vadi has nothing to do with education. It is a freebie in the name of education. If they link the same program to educational outcomes, I would have been delighted. There is a priceless opportunity squandered. There is only one goal: get the vote. There is no goal of improving the quality of education for the child. Therefore, Amma Vadi is not an educational program. I don't want to discuss it any further. Delhi model is not good enough either. I am glad that Arvind Kejriwal and our party are putting education, healthcare in the political discourse. I completely appreciate that, welcome it. While their healthcare model, though it is urban, it's not applicable to the rural areas in the same way, but it's an innovative model. I was very sad to see some news item today. Sachin Gay, the health minister, is implicated in some cases. I hope there is no problem because he's, to my mind, a wonderful minister. Healthcare model is much more viable there. But I don't want to go into detail. You can't apply it everywhere in the same manner, but there is something. Education, I think, so far the emphasis is to put money into schools, to showcase the good infrastructure, which is welcome. But good infrastructure necessarily does not make good education. It's necessary, but that's not the key requirement. Quality of education, the outcomes, they have begun to focus only lately. I don't know yet what is the current status. Therefore, you have to go much farther. Let me make two brief points. The great advantage of Indian society is, irrespective of caste, region, religion, rich or poor, urban or rural, all parents of India are willing to sacrifice for their kids. We are very lucky. While we always describe our problems and our challenges as a society, we forget the advantages that we have. Only when you go to some other countries and see the mess they are in, you realize how incredibly blessed we are. And you don't have to tell parents and families education is important. That bhashan is nonsensical. Every parent knows. The vegetable vendors and rickshaw pullers, they're sending their kids to private schools wherever they can afford, even when they cannot afford, at enormous expense relative to their income. I know rickshaw pullers who are sending their kids for 7,000-8,000 rupees annual fee in private schools. For them, it's a phenomenal sum of money. So that's one great advantage. The demand side is very strong. Government is spending a lot of money. Society values education. When you get selected to Hyderabad Central University or when you get selected to some job later on or something else, see the amount of adulation in India. Newspapers, families, village, town, that's all. The positive part of it is that we all revel in educational accomplishments. We all revel in success. Governments are spending a lot of money. I already gave you some numbers. These are not small sums for a poor country. These are pretty significant sums for a poor country. So the demand side is very strong, but the supply is hopeless. It's not more teachers. Our teacher-student ratio in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, for instance, is about 17 kids per teacher. You can't do better than that. If you think you can have more teachers, more classrooms, you're talking rubbish. You don't know anything about what's happening in India. That's not the real challenge. The real challenge is we don't understand the definition of success. We don't know how to measure it. We celebrate success without knowing what success is. Somebody got good grades, celebrate. He got a rank, celebrate. Got a selection, celebrate. But that is, examinations are thoroughly flawed. There is no evaluation, proper evaluation. It's not measuring your ability, your skills, your understanding, your comprehension of problem solving skills. Nobody pays attention. Therefore, in a situation where demand side is strong, resources are not a problem. The best way to bring about significant change is to change the definition of success and to measure success well. The evaluation methodology and integrity. Earlier, I would not have to say integrity because earlier it was only bad examinations and rote learning. Today, mass copying has become common in schools. I don't know if you guys are aware. Rampant mass copying. I dare say even in colleges and universities in many places. Examinations are stupid, soulless, irrelevant, rote-based. You just mug up 3-4 years of question papers of the last, I don't know how it is in your universities, I hope you are better. You mug up 3-4 years of question bank and you get top grades. And even that is not enough now, rampant mass copying. Therefore, not only the quality of examination, but also integrity of examination now we have to figure out. If you do that and that well, everything else will fall into place. There are a lot of things to be done, no question about it. But this is central. In public policy on a grand scale, remember there are 26 crore kids in schools in India, government and private. There are 3.8 crore kids in colleges in India. We're talking about 30 crore, about 28 for 30 crore kids in India. So this is bigger than, this is the third largest country in the world. The student population of India would be roughly the third largest country in the world. So you cannot go on retail. You can give bhashans, every school, every teacher, aisa karenge, by all means you do it. But you create a lever of change by altering the incentives. Let me give you an example. Take the PISA test. How many of you heard of PISA? Okay, there are 2 or 3 hands raised, 4 or 5 hands raised. PISA is Program for International Students Assessment. It's an OECD test annually conducted among the willing nations to compare the educational outcomes of 15-year-old kids. In what grade you are is irrelevant. Roughly at the age of 15, let's say 10th grade for our purposes. If you are 12-year-old, you want to study, you can participate in that too. Basically, outcomes are measured. The only difference is they don't measure the way Indian examinations measure. Not amenable to either mass copying or rote learning. They measure actual understanding of the concepts. They only measure 3 things: language and comprehension and communication ability. 2, logic. They don't give you complicated science formulae. They give you facts. They see how well can you derive conclusions from these facts. 3rd, mathematical concepts and their application. A good 7th grade kid must be able to do them. A bad postgraduate will not be able to do them. That is the yardstick. Therefore, most Indians do very poorly. The only time India participated out of 74 countries in the world at that time which participated in this, countries or entities, India stood 2nd from bottom. We are lucky that a country called Kyrgyzstan was included in that list. Because of them, we missed the last place. And the response of Indian government is immediately I went to town. This happened in 2009. You all must have been in schools or toddlers or something. So I went to town about it. I wanted to publicize this to awaken our society about educational failures in our country. We pretend that we are doing well, we do thoroughly badly. The response of the government was shocking. They said India will not participate in PISA surveys hereafter. That was the last survey they participated. India never participated after that. Now they are saying we will re-enter, but in select schools. Some of the better Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas and some of those schools they want to now, even that they are not doing, they are hesitant, but they want to now bring them in so that you showcase your best, not your average. That is not the way forward. And there are umpteen other surveys. I gave you some data about one survey. This is called ASR survey, Back to Basics. ASR has another more crude survey conducted from 2005 onwards. The first survey of ASR 2005, I released it, the findings in Delhi, along with Montague Singh Ahluwalia, the then Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission. Since then, I've been following those surveys very, very closely and also helping them along. They make very depressing reading. Very, very depressing reading. 40% kids in 8th grade cannot read a simple passage. About 25 to 30% cannot read in 8th grade a simple passage, 2nd grade passage. About 40% cannot do a simple subtraction. Forget understanding why subtraction. Just do a subtraction, 2-digit subtraction. 60% cannot do a simple division. Then you have government's own assessment surveys, national achievement surveys or something. NCRT and Government of India, they do it for grades. Tomes and tomes are there. They are with me also. Each of these is showing the same bleak picture. So if you alter the way educational outcomes are measured, and if you ensure that measurement is honest, then you are creating a lever for change, an incentive. Then you cannot overnight improve the quality of teachers and all this stuff. Try your best, do all those things, but you have no technology. Wherever possible, use technology to a minimal extent at least, 10%. Because the teachers are already bad. Even if they are willing to teach, many of them don't care. There is no accountability. But even if they are willing to teach, many of them are already the products of the current failed education system. They themselves have no conceptual understanding. Therefore, their ability to teach is now questionable. There's no point blaming them also. They're victims. Now, luckily, technology gives us opportunity. Khanacademy.org and many other Diksha, other things. There are plenty of open source software is available. In an intelligent way, make sure that the kids get that extra help for conceptual understanding. Rest of it will follow. So do a few things wisely, smartly, intelligently. Forget the distinction between government and private sector. Low-end private schools where the poor kids go to, you can't afford to pay 50,000, 1 lakh rupee fee, but 10,000, 12,000 they can certainly pay. When you're spending 90,000 in government, what's the problem in paying 10,000 fee for a poor kid? Provided outcomes are good, measure the outcomes. Ignore the distinction between public and private. The kid is the center of our universe. Every kid is entitled to quality education. So with a few things, within the current expenditure, doing it differently and smartly, we can radically transform education. We are not a Timbuktu. We are not in Afghanistan, where you have to tell parents to send the kids to school. You are not some other back of the woods country. We are a relatively civilized country where every parent of every community, of every social group wants their kids to flourish. And we are not paying attention. We are just, at least of late, there is some talk about education, healthcare. A little bit talk, I'm happy. But we are nowhere near grasping the problems. We are still scratching the surface. We have to accelerate the process.
Good evening, sir. My question is regarding education only. During the span of last 2 years, it has been witnessed that the COVID-19 pandemic has generated suffering on an unthinkable scale. Almost every sector has been affected, and education sector is of no difference. So my question is, which all the ways do you think which are very much essential to overcome the education crisis being suffered by the students, especially the students who could not afford the better schooling, because these are the students who missed out the most rudimentary education, which is very much essential to do well in their further education. So which thing, like, what are the solutions that you would suggest?
See, COVID certainly made education problematic world over. Nothing new here, because after all, education essentially is about the teacher-student interface. Once the school is shut down, it's a challenge. There's no question about it. But our problem is unrelated. We are pretending COVID is a problem. Without COVID, our education was in shambles. Without COVID, our healthcare was in shambles. COVID only gave us an opportunity to examine ourselves very honestly. The crisis in healthcare, for instance, last year around this time, if you recall, at the height of the Delta wave, what happened? Absence of oxygen, absence of beds, and absence of primary care, and therefore the patients not knowing when hospitalization is needed, it's nothing to do with COVID. It's everything to do with the colossally failed healthcare system. Similarly, even without COVID, our education is in shambles for most of the kids. It's further deepened. So, what cannot be undone, let's not worry about it. It's a global problem. Use it as an opportunity. And luckily for us, at last, long last, there is actually a pretty sound education policy in place. The national education policy is a pretty sound policy. I don't say this very casually. It's not about merely shibboleths, though there are some routine shibboleths and slogans. Most of it is well reasoned, well thought out, with a clear understanding of the diagnosis and with a set of solutions, a roadmap. So we have the framework available. We are not working against the government now, except that the government doesn't work for the government itself. They simply enunciate policies, they don't understand, they don't care. But if you simply look at the larger picture of the education policy, both for school education and higher education, with the existing expenditure, with the minor adjustments, we already have a roadmap. That's the point I'm making. And technology gives us fantastic opportunity. And technology doesn't have to be even a tablet and a computer, even a smartphone. And increasingly now people have access to phones in the country. So even technology certainly creates barriers. It is well known that distance education generally disadvantages the poorer sections, because once you don't have the access to Wi-Fi and the tools, you're at a disadvantage. There's no doubt about it. But once you make some efforts to overcome, and we can do it at a relatively low cost, it significantly reduces the disadvantage, because the disadvantage suffered now in schools is far greater than the technology gap. Right now, the better schools, educated parents, and means for the family versus those who don't have the advantages, it is now 10 to 1 difference. Technology gap may be 1 to 2. It is bad. It's way better than 10 to 1. So don't look for perfection. This is a war. There's no perfection possible. Every day matters. Every day matters. Every year, if you delay, And that year's kids, how many kids are born in the country every year? About 2.6 crore kids. 26 million kids' future is undermined if you wait for one more year. So you don't wait for perfection. What is available, with a bit of effort, we can easily, significantly improve. That's the broader point I'm making. Don't connect it to see, we're all fond of Western debates. My God, what happened in COVID? How do you improve education in the last years? That is an American problem and a European problem. Our problem is, my God, what happened to 2 generations of my kids who were lost? Let's not pretend we lost 2 years, we lost 2 generations.
మన తెలుగు స్టేట్ కానీ ఇంకా మన ఇండియా కానీ మీలాంటి లీడర్షిప్ అనేది అవసరం ఉంది సార్. మీ లీడర్షిప్లో యూత్కి అవకాశం దొరకాలి, యూత్ క్వశ్చన్ చేయాలి. అల్టిమేట్గా లెజిస్లేషనే కదా సార్ మ్యాటర్. లెజిస్లేషన్ వాళ్ళు తలుచుకుంటేనే విద్య మారుతుంది, వైద్యం మారుతుంది, దేశంలో మార్పు వస్తుంది. మళ్ళీ అది ఆ లెజిస్లేషన్లో మార్పు రావడానికి ఏం చేయాలి సార్ మేము?
I don't want to go too much into politics, but I understand what you're saying. Obviously, political reform is required. Right kind of people, right kind of policies are required. But it will not happen in a hurry. Trust me. To find an alternative to Congress party took up to 1998 from 1947. 51 years it took. Now we are looking at alternative to contemporary politics itself. Now there are some green shoots in Delhi. Hopefully Punjab also they'll do a decent job. Let's hope for the best and help them if they're willing to take help. But it will not spread dramatically suddenly. India, when you look at India politically, you think of 20 countries at least. Transforming 20 countries is not a joke. Peacefully, it takes time, effort. It will happen eventually. Now, if you wait for that, will another generation go in the country? Economic growth must happen. Such improvements in rule of law as are possible must happen. Healthcare improvement must happen. Education must happen. If you wait for me or you or somebody has to come to power, until that time India will be decimated. What kind of India do you have? So, de-link them. While you work for political transformation if it's possible, and quicken it if it's possible. After all, I'm the one who gave a call in India for young people to come and participate for the first time. Middle classes to come and participate. I'm the one who founded a new kind of political party in India. So I would not be opposed to what you're saying. But don't wait for that. Don't link them. Don't say until that happens, this cannot happen. That's a disaster for the country. That's all I'm saying. Okay?
Good evening, sir. My name is Amo. I agree with your analysis that free handout policy welfare measures doesn't really address the systemic issues. But having said that, what it does is by vilifying the welfare policy handout system, the void that is filled is by identity politics. So the material interests of the voter takes a backseat, and more euphemistic ideas about identity, ethnicity takes the front seat. So it disincentivizes the political parties to even float welfare policy measures. How do we solve this pitfall?
I agree with you broadly, because in any democracy, it's easy to deflect people's anger into religion, region, caste, language, or other divisions. World over, you're saying it. In India, in fact, in my judgment, India is better. In my judgment, Indian people are a little smarter, though they're not educated in the formal sense. Because of centuries of experience of coexistence, we are a little more sensible. But it's always a potential danger in a democracy. Therefore, the issue should not be framed as freebies versus no freebies. In a country like India, when there's desperate poverty, some amount of welfare is required. But let's not pretend that is the solution. Let us focus on, this is the important thing, the central role of the state. Why did human society create the state? After all, the state is the artificial construct. The government is an artificial construct. It's not there. It's not a natural order. Because human society learned to coexist on a very large scale and cooperate on a very large scale, you required some mechanism to manage this interface. Otherwise, there will be anarchy. Therefore, the first order priority for the state is rule of law. In the olden days, you would say law and order at any cost, but that's not enough. More than law and order. Justice, order, and rule of law. You understand what I mean, therefore I don't want to go into details. I also gave you a hint of some of the points I made initially. It's not merely order. But that was the first proto-state world over. Eventually what happened? The state realized there's something more that they could do. Ashoka is regarded as one of the great emperors of the world. Why? He was one of the first emperors in the world who recognized the state had other purposes apart from mere law, mere order. In all the school textbooks, what did you read about Ashoka? He planted trees, he dug wells, he built chowdhuries, he constructed roads. What is so new? Every foolish government today is doing that. But at that time, it was quite spectacularly new. That the government has a purpose beyond maintaining order and conquering territories was a great innovation. It was a great step forward. That's why he was Ashoka the Great. Over time, as economies became a little more mature, infrastructure, Europe has shown the way, for instance, even in the Middle Ages, how infrastructure is so important. And in the modern world, much more so, transport and communications and electricity are the heart. And of course, water supply and sanitation, sewerage, stormwater drainage, etc. But in the past century or more, about 150 years ago, education, in the past 70, 80 years, healthcare, human societies understood that without enhancing human capabilities, you cannot navigate the complexity of a modern economy and technology. Therefore, it's not merely an act of charity. You want your economy to grow, you want people to be able to produce, then you have to give them skills. The old-fashioned skills of digging pits and filling pits is not enough once you move from agrarian economy to modern economy. Therefore, education and healthcare productivity is vital. Now, you define the role of the state, encompassing these four areas: rule of law, public amenities and infrastructure, quality education, quality healthcare. Now, a state that does not perform this role well has failed. You cannot judge a state by welfareism at the cost of this. The minimal things required to protect the people, vulnerable sections in times of distress, yes, but your primary role is the collective infrastructure and institutions to enhance human capacity and give dignity, not to people make mendicants. So it's not about welfare versus no welfare. It's about state fulfilling its role, welfare having its place, but not pretending that welfare is the answer to India's problems. In fact, this will also put the divisive forces on the map. We are now giving a state a purpose. We are not merely saying to party A, party B is the alternative. To idea A, idea B is the alternative. So that's the kind of discourse I think we need to raise. I agree with you. There's always a danger in society. And whatever you do, ultimately, that's the reason why I'm always in favor of local governments. I'm one of the greatest fanatics in India alive today still about local governments. Not because I have illusions about the ordinary people or their wisdom. I know they're a bunch of idiots often. I know they fight and caste and other divisive impulses. I know they're ignorant, illiterate, all these things too. But they will learn very fast. As long as my mistakes, the price is paid by me, not by others. My good decisions, the benefit accrues to me and not to others, I will learn fastest. That's the way democracy matures. And then, automatically people look for their economic and other interests rather than sectional interests. The identities become important in an amorphous society. Individual becomes important in an atomized society. Therefore, it's called politics of individuation. Create institutions and a public discourse model which focuses on individual growth and opportunity. Then I look at what is there in it for me. When there is nothing for me, then I look at my caste, my region, my religion, etc. The only antidote to these divisive impulses is you cannot erase it forcibly. You cannot give bhashans and eliminate it. You have to draw a bigger line. That bigger line is my self-interest and my family's interest. And that's what I'm talking about. We haven't designed that framework. We simply wrote a constitution, a beautiful constitution. We gave ourselves some kind of a quasi-democratic model. We go through regular elections, however flawed they are, after all, elections fairly conducted and peacefully conducted. What happens is behind the polling booth, the money, the cash, the freebies of course publicly done, but public discourse. But in the polling booth, there's no serious problem. The issue is not the polling booth. We distorted everything. Democracy is not this. It's not sufficient to have democracy. Vote and shout are not enough for a democracy. We require much more for democracy. Rule of law is democracy. Empowerment is democracy. Enhancing the capacity is democracy. And in some respects, China is more democratic than India. I'm one of the few Indians who dares to say it publicly. Even from our adversaries, we should learn. We must be humble enough to acknowledge our mistakes. Democracy is not merely vote and shout. Even the global problems today, the bigger divide about democracy and undemocracy, some of the problem is because we narrowly define democracy, vote and protest. Much more is needed for democracy. We are not truly a democracy. struggling to be a democracy.
As rightly pointed out by you, the ISS survey points out that there is a severe problem in India, especially among the 7th and 8th graders, that their ability to solve the basic arithmetic skills and basic reading skills. So, whether there should be more focus on vernacular education at the primary and the secondary level in order to have better educational outcomes. That is.
Good question. The answer is very simple, but the operation is complex. The answer is straightforward. You must teach the kids in the language that they know. Don't call it vernacular, don't call it mother tongue, whichever language they know. After all, supposing a Chinese speaker comes to you, gives you a fantastic lecture in Chinese, how many of us will understand? What's the purpose of it? How can a 5-year-old kid understand a language that she does not speak? So, this does not require brains. For some years in early schooling, teaching in a language other than the language in which the child interacts with the community is absurd. Absurd in that you have to argue itself is a shame. That this point needs to be made, that a Chinese lecturer cannot come and speak to us in Chinese. It makes no sense to us. That I have to argue this point is stupid, right? But the problem is, we have already messed up so much because of social attitudes, colonial hangover, the love for English language, not even love actually. I don't think many of these kids know, any of these fellows know English. But the exaggerated respect for English language and so on, we already damaged the psyche considerably. Therefore, I would not argue on that ground. What I would say is, pretend you are English medium if that's what the people want. I don't care. But first few years, make English as a language to learn, but teach the concepts and the foundations in the language that they understand. After 4-5 years, make it bilingual. Once they are increasingly proficient in also English, understanding the concepts, by the time they finish school, you make it English. I have no quarrel. So I'm no longer even talking about English versus Telugu or something. And I certainly never used the cultural argument in my life. It's not the burden of the young people of India to sustain the culture of India. If indeed English is better, so be it. My argument is academic. You cannot learn in a language other than in which you can speak with the community. It does not require genius to understand this simple point. But we have already gone too far, we messed up. Therefore, don't use the language debate as a point of discord. Use the point of grasping the concepts and understanding. Therefore, initially a language, but start with English, bilingual, then move towards English if that's what you wish. So make it a pragmatic approach. Because otherwise, if I go to a rickshaw program and say, don't send your kid to English medium school, अच्छा, हमारा बेटा English medium को जा सकता है, हमारा बेटा नहीं जा सकता है क्या? See, we are already too far gone. The debate is unnecessarily perverted. Today, in the name of English medium, what is happening is the non-English knowing kids are being taught by non-English knowing teachers in English. So it's all a make-believe medium. So how does it matter? Ignore it. Go into the essence of education.
I have a question, two queries. This introduction session is about the quality education. So since 1969, Telangana separation movement started, and we have same education system since then and now. So as you're following same education system, what is following with Andhra Pradesh? So what do you say, sir, about this?
I don't think there's any relationship between Telangana movement and the education system. See, if you take the present day Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, there's a marginal difference because of history. Right during the freedom struggle in British India and in the first generation after freedom struggle, the early leadership, because of the spirit of freedom struggle at that time, enlightened movement rather than the feudal structure of Telangana, school education was given a lot of importance. In my village, for instance, or many villages in my district, two very prominent leaders of the district in those days, they made education a movement. Hundreds of schools were established with the community's participation. They were not bureaucratically done from the district or state capital. The community participated, they gave land willingly. They contributed 25 rupees an acre in those days. 25 rupees an acre was the princely sum in those days, equivalent to about 5,000 rupees an acre. Farmers contributed so that the school could be established. And they built some thatched huts. Teachers felt it was their community. They felt they were part of the community. They were paid a small sum of 70 rupees in those days per month. but they still took it as a matter of great privilege. And the families, the village community took care of the school, they took pride in the school. So all that happened in Madras presidency, not only in coastal Andhra, but also in the present Tamil Nadu state. Telangana, that started happening a little later. The school infrastructure was built much later. So there is a generational gap. Today, I don't think there is much of a gap in infrastructure. Rural Telangana may be slightly less than rural Andhra Pradesh, but not much different. Now the gap is, but everywhere things are bad, outcomes are bad. So it's no longer that there's a distinction between Telangana and some other part of the country. Sadly, even Kerala outcomes are not good enough. The ASAR surveys, for instance, show that even Kerala, one of the better states of India, they're not good. In fact, the 73rd rank in the world out of 74 entities, we sent our two best, or we allowed survey in our two best states, allegedly the two best states, Tamil Nadu and Himachal Pradesh. If our bad states are there, it would have been 75th. So all over the country, it's uniformly bad. There are minor variations. That is the tragedy today. So there's nothing to distinguish. There are a few individuals who are excellent. We are confusing between individuals and the average. Whenever you say about education, I have spoken to some of your vice chancellors earlier on. They said, no problem, sir, we are doing very well. No, Indira Nuyyi is there in America. Satya Nadella is there. Sundar Pichai is there. So we always showcase our best. Of course, who says the Indian best are not equal to the best in the world? We are. But they are despite the education system, not because of the education system. These are the exceptions. These are the 1%. Do we showcase our 1% and mess up the lives of the balance, at least 80-85%? Or do we look at the 85% and build their future? That 1% will anyway flourish no matter what you do. You don't require to do anything for them. So that is the broader point I'm making. So today, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, there's hardly any difference. We're all in the same boat. And everywhere, luckily, expenditure is increasing. Infrastructure is getting better. And sadly, nobody is bothering about outcomes. Nobody knows how to generate outcomes.
అంటే మేము అన్నట్టు హెల్త్ అండ్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్, ముఖ్యంగా క్వాలిటీ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ చాలా ఇంపార్టెంట్ అండి. అంటే లాస్ట్ 130 years నుంచి ఒక పెద్ద మూవ్మెంట్ కూడా జరిగింది. అందులో భాగంగా రైట్ టు ఎడ్యుకేషన్ యాక్ట్ కూడా వచ్చింది 2009లో. సో సేమ్ హెల్త్లో కూడా క్లినిక్ ఎస్టాబ్లిష్మెంట్ 2012 యాక్ట్ అది కూడా ఉంది. అంటే ఈ మూవ్మెంట్తో, అంటే ఒక మూవ్మెంట్ చేస్తే రైట్ క్వాలిటీ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ వస్తుంది, ఒక మూవ్మెంట్తో హెల్త్ కేర్ వస్తుంది అనేది ఉంది. కానీ చట్టం చేసినప్పుడు కూడా, ఇప్పుడు రైట్ టు ఎడ్యుకేషన్ యాక్ట్ వచ్చినప్పుడు కూడా క్వాలిటీ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ కూడా పెద్ద ఇంప్రూవ్మెంట్ అయితే ఏం లేదు. అంటే ఇంతకన్నా, అంటే ఒక చట్టం వచ్చేంత వరకు ఒక మూవ్మెంట్ జరిగింది, చట్టం చేస్తే కావాలి కదా ఆటోమేటిక్. బట్ ఇంకేం చేయాలి అంటే ఇంత మంచి చట్టం వచ్చిన తర్వాత?
It's a good question. See, we are very fond of movements in the country and legislation. We think we make a law, the problem is solved. You require a movement for education if the society does not understand the value of education. What is the purpose of a movement? To mobilize the community to understand the value of something which is not adequately recognized, and therefore make it the center stage of our policy discussion. When every parent wants the child to be educated, it is not a movement that is required, it is the delivery that is required. Now, enrollment is now universal, 100% enrollment in schools now. Every kid who is born in India is by and large enrolled in schools. The second pretense is you make a law, you amend the constitution, you created a right to education as a fundamental right, you solve the problem. As if before the right to education was made a fundamental right, somebody prevented you from giving education. Tell me which provision of the constitution or law prevented you from giving education before that's introduced in parliament? You completely misdiagnosed the problem. It's a lie. And as you said rightly, 2009 this became the right to education, fundamental right. I can actually prove to you that educational outcomes declined since 2009 to 2022. So this is all a classic trap. You pretend that there is some make-believe solution. You waste energy on those silly things, and you a lot of lung power, some well-meaning, good, innocent people really putting all their energy into it, wasting their breath, thinking that they achieved a lot. Ultimately, nothing happening. What you require is simple delivery. I already gave you some hints. What are the ways of delivery? Making the child the center of the universe in public finances, evaluating better and with integrity, and creating tools to overcome the conceptual lapses, so on and so forth. So there are, similar to higher education, the present education policy is good enough. Nothing more is required. Already we have a sound policy. What we need now is the sound policy to be actually translated into reality, because there is no dearth of money, There's no dearth of will because the policy exists. We just have to make it happen. Therefore, now neither legislation nor movements are required. We just have to make it work. And unless we, the stakeholders, we pay attention, unless we shout from rooftops, unless we are willing to stand up and not let the political parties get away with some symbolic gestures, it will continue for another 30 years. Already we lost enormous amount of time. Enormous amount of time. It's a shame. It's a disgrace and it's a tragedy. And we can quickly improve it. Education within 5 years we can significantly improve. Healthcare within 1 year we can significantly improve. If you mean business, with available resources and tools. That's the broad point I make. So don't waste time again talking about right to health. That's a disaster. Nobody stopped you from giving health. Damn it, start giving healthcare. Don't talk about right to health.
Sir, my apologies if my question is deviate from the topic, but I believe my question is related to first part of the topic today. Sir, actually, I remember your call in 2015 in Andhra Pradesh for the ban of alcohol, and I still believe that is a reality. I mean, the problem is still existing in Andhra Pradesh. In fact, the current government, which promised alcohol ban in Andhra Pradesh, has gave the revenues of alcohol as a collateral for the loan, and I believe there is a substantial impact because of domestic violence, which is a result of alcohol, especially in the rural areas, on the kids who goes to school every day. And I have recently came across with an article from Pehle NGO where it said 50% of the out-pocket expenditure in Andhra Pradesh is actually spent on the diseases which are result of alcohol. And one irony, even we have seen it during the pandemic time, that when government says that they'll reduce the alcohol shops or the so-and-so consumption, actually the people are going for the adulterated drugs and all, alcohol. Don't you see we need one more movement, which you started way back in 25, the Loksatta movement to ban alcohol? I'm asking this question because most of the time we talk about education system, quality teaching stuff when it comes to quality of education. But these are the things which really deviating students and even the family members when it comes to healthcare, which requires attention from scholars like you. And even the betting thing you can talk about. I need clarity on these issues from you, sir. Thank you.
Two broad responses. The first response is there are multiple problems in our society. Do not ever make one problem an alibi for another problem to continue. If you say until the politics of India is sorted out, you cannot give education. Or as one People's War Group affiliated teachers union years ago argued, and I gave them a shelling. They said until poverty is eliminated, you can't improve education. I have not seen a more stupid argument. There is no society where poverty is eliminated without education. Education is the key to prosperity and alleviation of poverty. And you pretend that education cannot be imparted without poverty being eliminated. As if there is some magic and miracle of eliminating poverty without education. And these are supposed to be Naxal groups. I was so ashamed of them. So don't ever make one problem an alibi to continue with another problem. Alcohol and drugs are a problem. There's no reason to pretend that education cannot be addressed until alcohol is addressed. Because then nothing will be addressed in the world, in the country. You will continue with all problems. You'll keep on describing them, making slogans. Some people become champions. Nothing will happen. The poverty will be perpetuated. That's a disaster for the country. So be very careful about this mixing up issues. Second, to come to the specific, I am opposed to alcohol personally. I don't drink. But I never gave a call for banning of alcohol. You're mistaken. I did enormous work in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana in those days. In thousands of villages, the Loksatta workers, women, youngsters, they went and they campaigned and did a lot of work. I myself went on padayatras, etc. I never articulated a ban because I knew it was unworkable. I was always opposed to prohibition, not because I want people to consume. In a democratic society or even an undemocratic society, you must be practical. Just because I have certain notions of life, I cannot impose it on others. Even if they are worthy, sometimes they are not worthy. Sometimes they may be worthy, but I cannot impose on others. Therefore, what we should do in case of alcohol is minimize access to the poor. So what I argued at that time is, the village shops must not be there unless the village community says yes. let there be a vote in the village community whether they want a shop in the vicinity or not. If that's not there, it will be some distance. To that extent, at least the access is restricted. The so-called belt shops, which are nothing but unauthorized outlets, unlicensed outlets, again give the village community the power. They can enforce it. Even if legally the shop is not permissible, the belt shops exist because there is a demand, market demand. If the majority in the village don't want in the village, then let them have the power to enforce. Third, prohibit public drinking. If you want to consume, you buy, go home and drink. But you can't drink publicly, either in the street or even in the bar. Because after drinking in the public place, most of the mischief happens between the bar and home. The drunken fellow on the road, many places in villages near the liquor shop, it's a terror. The women, the kids and others don't even dare to go on that road. So no prohibition of public drinking. And of course taxation as it is today, make the price as high as possible. And encourage softer drinks like beer, etc., so that at least the consumption goes in favor of the softer, the low alcohol content liquors rather than the high alcohol content. And finally, any offense, even minimal offense, while drunken, make it very serious offense. Punish them ruthlessly. So have a series of graded mechanisms. Because prohibition never worked. If you take the mafia in the United States, prohibition came up during the Prohibition days. Mafias came up during Prohibition days. Bootlegging was the primary source of mafia's wealth initially. You take Gujarat, everybody has liquor. That's the only state which continues with prohibition because Mahatma Gandhi's state. Except that the government does not take the revenue, liquor mafias are continuing. Liquor continues to be unchecked. Bihar, they tried, it's not working well. So prohibition is not the answer, but very intelligent regulation. And of course, most important, de-addiction. Please remember, all addictive drugs, after a point, it's a disease. It's no longer in your control. It's not because you're a good fellow or a bad fellow. Your body takes over. It's called physical dependence. It's a medical issue. Unless there is detoxification and de-addiction program, systematically arranged and accessible to people with zero out-of-pocket expenditure. Already the problem is there. My suspicion is, in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, I'm giving a ballpark number. I don't have data readily. Normally, I don't speak without data. I would not be surprised if at least 50 lakh people, that's a conservative estimate, are already addicted. That's a huge number. Addicted, I'm saying. That means without drink, they cannot survive any longer now. Now, that cannot be addressed by banning or anything. You have to address it by a medical management. So you must do that. But don't link it with education. Do that work. Do this work. But don't use one as an alibi for that. But same approach applies to drugs also. Now is not the time, but maybe one day we could discuss, but I'll give you a hint. Banning marijuana is ridiculous. Making it a terrible criminal offense, treating it on par with narcotics, and somebody, Shahrukh Khan's son consumed, maybe or did not consume, somebody else consumed half a gram or 1 gram, then make a big issue, put him in jail, ask for 15 crores bribe. We are destroying the country's future. It's a disaster. You have distinguished drugs. There are some which are recreational drugs which are non-addictive. I don't want it. If somebody wants to enjoy it, I have no right to stop you. Let's be practical. You wanted horse racing to stop, betting is to be stopped. My friend, that's not the way human life operates. Let me regulate my behavior. Let them regulate their behavior. You cannot impose your behavioral standards on others. However unpleasant it is, the law can be used only when the public interest is affected. Mainly when your freedom impinges on my freedom, when your freedom violates my freedom, causes violence to me or violence to my rights, only then can the law interfere. Remember that. You like it or not, people live the way they want to live. You cannot decide how they live. Otherwise, I decide your food habits, I decide your drinking habits, your dress habits, your betting habits, your marriage habits. Where is the end to this? So there are serious issues. We may be well-meaning. We understand the problem, but we must be judicious in addressing the challenge. Otherwise, you will cause more harm than good. So separate the harmless drugs. Tell people don't indulge in too much, but separate them. There are some harmful drugs, narcotics, opiates. The opium drugs are real narcotics. And cocaine, potentially very dangerous, methamphetamine, other things. So separate them. And even in those cases, don't criminalize the casual user. I suspect there is not an adolescent who does not try something or other. In your university, I'm sure many of you are trying sometime or other. But that's human nature. I remember I smoked at the age of 10 in a village. Gogupalla, this Gogupul ante emiti that jute. The jute shoot, you can remove the pit of it in the middle, so it's all hollow. No smoking, nothing. You just light it, you take it in the mouth and you release it. Because that is your rebellion. At the age of 10, I rebel now against my parents and society. It is foolish, but that's the way childhood is. Now, if you make a casual user a criminal, you're not helping. Decriminalize the casual users. Go after the supply chains. And two, if there's an addiction problem, de-addict. Help them. Give counseling. Wherever countries attempted that, they succeeded. A tiny country called Portugal had a huge problem. They went about the rational policy. Now Portugal is doing well. America criminalized everything. 70% of prisoners in American jails are drug offenders. America has the greatest drug consumption. America is the greatest market. America is creating drug mafias. Your intentions don't make sound policy. Policy must be very wise, understanding human nature, what works, what does not. And you cannot order society. You cannot decide what every human being does in her or his personal life. But you can minimize misconduct, minimize damage to others. Be practical. It's very difficult to comprehend this. When you grow up and you have kids, you'll understand even kids you cannot dictate, let alone dictate to society. Your own children, they will not listen to you. I don't know how much you listen to your parents. It's human nature. So don't be overly paternal. Don't try to control. Use the state power wisely and judiciously. Use it excessively, it becomes rapacious and corrupt. Because you had third-rate laws in 1985, marijuana is included in the narcotics in India without any understanding. The countries that bullied us in introducing, they have removed that. They now made marijuana legal. We are continuing. Now police have made it a fantastic source of revenue and harassment and humiliation. It's a terrible thing that's happening in a country. So you must think much deeper. Don't go by newspaper headlines and slogans. Education is about discerning, deep understanding, research, global comparisons, data, analysis, and constructive and creative solutions.
So my question is that, like you said, lakhs of criminal cases are pending in courts in India, and even this recently constituted fast track courts are also not delivering fast judgments. So what can be the alternative of this? And so, like you said, like rule of law is necessary. So without delivering this fast justice, how can the rule of law be implemented?
There's no time to go into details. If you're interested, on our website, you'll find a whole discussion paper. I held a 9-day conference at the height of COVID. 9-day conference. There were 70 global scholars on rule of law. Police, prosecution, forensics, courts, judicial procedures. All addressed comprehensively. So there's a lot to be done. There's no one single answer. But it can be done. Suffice, because otherwise the discussion will digress now. We are looking very deep into that. There's a lot we need to do, there's a lot we can. All practical things. I don't talk about theoretical stuff. If it's not practical, if it's not affordable, if it's not a tried and tested solution, I never utter a word about it. When I say a word, you can take it from me, there would have been tens or even hundreds of hours of study. I'm not in the habit of giving reckless slogans and casual statements. So I'm saying with absolute certainty, it's not going to be easy. And in fact, the second report or third report, Administrative Reforms Commission is on public order. I wrote that report entirely. I already gave a glimpse of what needs to be done. I gave a roadmap. It's a published report available, 300 pages or so. And I gave actually detailed structuring, how to do it systematically. So there's a way of doing it.
My name is Rohit. I'm from political science. Sir, as you pointed out, speaking about local governance, over centralization is detrimental to development. What is your opinion about the three capital model of Andhra Pradesh? మూడు రాజధానులతో కూడిన అధికార వికేంద్రీకరణ మరియు ఏకైక రాజధాని వీటి మధ్యలో ఏది మేలని మీరు భావిస్తున్నారు?
This is not decentralization. You see, unfortunately, our public discourse doesn't understand basic concept. This is at best deconcentration. Decentralization is giving power to the smaller tiers of government, the district tier, the municipal tier, the city tier, and the local tier. This is at best deconcentration. One here, one there, instead of all at one place. And it's irrelevant to me. We are confusing between a political capital and administrative capital and the economic hub of activity. Because they wanted to kill Amaravati, because earlier government projected it, they pretended as if they have some philosophy behind it. Let's not waste our breath on those silly political debates. It's irrelevant. If you are really committed to decentralization, make the district the hub of government. Way back in 1988, I argued with the then Prime Minister. The title of my paper at that time was District Governments. Not merely local bodies, district government. Make the district government a third tier of federal government with a clearly defined set of powers and financing mechanism and accountability structure. That is decentralization. This is politics in the name of decentralization, which actually is deconcentration. Don't get dragged down. No, never let others set the terms of debate you want to notice. I never get into some silly debates because I've been issuing nonsensical debates. It doesn't matter yes or no, both are irrelevant. You're wasting our breath. There are so many issues of fundamental importance in India. Focus on them. Don't let others dictate your agenda. And don't respond to that day's newspaper headlines. You become a joker, ultimately.
This is Prabhakar from School of Life Sciences. First of all, it's my pleasure to interact with you and be here. And my question is that, as you mentioned that 4 things are needed for the society to develop a better education. So, in this society, how long it will take to take place to changes towards the new modern education system in the society? And second question is, in the society, for example, Telangana state, they are providing a lot of liquor to the society, which is giving a more revenue for the government. Is it a part of education system according to the ruling government? Thank you, sir.
I cannot answer for the ruling government in the state, but you know what is happening, as our friend earlier mentioned. Basically, you're giving in the form of so-called welfare, you're taking in the form of liquor. It has added benefit of completely putting people to sleep, undermining their faculties to be able to understand their own lives, or protest when you do something wrong. So we all understand the game, so let's not waste our breath. But about education, you know, Telugulo oka saameta unnadi, utti kagarledama swargan kagarledam. We are now at this stage. In the same PISA survey, China was number 1. We should all be ashamed. China is our competitor. China is not a fabulously wealthy country. They're doing better than us now, right? That's all. But China proved that you don't have to be in Norway or Finland or United States to be number 1. You must take confidence in that. If you are 74th in PISA out of 70, 73rd in PISA out of 74, let's aim at 30-40. Within 5 years, if we make the earnest attempts today, we can reach the 30-40 level. Within the next 5 years, because society in India is very strong and wants education, we can reach the top 20-25 level. After that, let us see. At least if we reach that level, if we are in the top 1/3 or 1/4 of the number of countries in the quality of outcomes, at least we have a reasonable framework for economic growth and the poverty to be eliminated. After that, we can aim at better. So don't say now, how will I be number 1? You are now at the bottom, remember. Now figure out a way of going somewhere in the middle, then somewhere in the top tier, then hopefully in some respects at the top. So you'll not be top everywhere. The other day when I was in California last, I think 3-4 years ago, after COVID, no travel, so I didn't go anywhere. I discovered California state, they were ranked 35th in mathematical outcomes in PISA survey. So 35th. For America, it's a shameful thing. So what did they do? They understood the problem. They didn't pretend it didn't exist. They didn't stop the surveys in California. They designed a program to improve the quality of mathematical outcomes in schools. So you keep doing it. Wherever you find deficiencies, you address it. But let's now move from the 73rd, 74th to at least middle tier. It's possible within about 5 years if we make earnest attempt today. It will not happen within 5 years because education is a long-term process. 5 years also is an ambitious target. It's possible within 5-10 years we can significantly improve. Any improvement is welcome. We need desperately improvement.
My question is, does new education policy have potential to bring the changes in quality of education, especially for the children who are underprivileged and don't have opportunities like us?
Wholeheartedly recommend this policy. Those who are interested, it's a 66-page policy. If you're interested, go through it carefully. There are some elements I don't agree with, but no, in a large policy, when multiple stakeholders got together and prepared something, you can't agree with everything. But you can see fundamentally it's a sound policy. well argued, based on evidence and logic, and gave us a very sensible, a credible roadmap. If you interpret it properly and implement it energetically and enthusiastically and honestly, this policy is already enough. You don't require to do anything spectacular. But you have to innovate in implementing the policy, in understanding the policy.
Hello, sir. Good evening, and happy to see you here.
My pleasure.
Yes. So my question is that too, as you stated, though we have actually my question is related to Indian law. You stated that many lakhs of cases are in pending, though we have courts as well as fast track courts, as well as we can see the consumer forums at district level as well as state and national level. So why these many number of cases are in pending state?
Another occasion we discuss rule of law in considerable detail, but let me give you some big picture. We have inadequate number of judges. World over, in advanced countries, the judge population ratio is about 100 per 100,000 population. In India, we have about now I think 14 per 100,000 population. That's not the real problem. And I'm sorry to say this almost publicly. Let me put it a little more politely, because I think I'm on camera. We are not able to attract real talent to judiciary. Legal education itself is substandard, but even when there is improvement in recent years in some sectors, the good lawyers are not unwilling to become judges. We're not able to attract good talent to judiciary. And judiciary requires talent. Judiciary is about understanding the issues, logically examining them, coming to a rational determination, because judiciary is not about a King Solomon sitting and saying whatever he pleases. It has to be presidentially valued. It has to be based on constitutional grounds and legal grounds. It has to stand the scrutiny of common sense, global practices. No, a lot of understanding is required. Then, lucidly explaining in writing. Remember, judiciary is respected because a written order is given with all the reasoning. If your reasoning is flawed, we understand it. Tomorrow somebody can set it right. So, lucidly explaining the reasoning and coming to rational conclusions. That requires a high quality of talent. Unfortunately, the talent is inadequate. So, number is inadequate, talent is inadequate. 2. Judicial procedures are extremely vexatious, very dilatory processes, very delayed. So, procedural law changes are required, significant changes are required. 3. Our police are understaffed. We have about 100 policemen per 100,000 population. The world norm is 250. You may not reach 250, but we must go a little in that direction. And then too many functions are combined in one monolithic police force. From traffic management to VIP security to guard duties to crime investigation is absurd. We must separate crime investigation, make it insulated from political vagaries. You can't make all police independent. Impossible, because if police are totally independent, if they become reckless, then the society has no safety. So crime investigation, make it independent and accountable. Because crime investigation is like a judicial function. What is crime investigation? Collecting evidence against the accused, identifying the accused, collecting evidence against the accused and producing before court to get a prosecution and conviction. How can that be politically determined? Law and order has to be politically determined. You cannot deal with the student agitation as a communal riot. Even if students go a little beyond the line, you are a little more considerate. They are our own children, youngsters, emotional, so you are more tolerant. Communal riot, the first principle is go shoot. Stop the damn riot at any cost. So, political judgment is required in order, because not everything is the same as everything else. You can't simply say a line is drawn and shoot. But crime investigation has no place for politics. Make it independent. Then improve forensics. India has no forensic capability. When that Sunanda Pushkar death happened, murder or death, I do not know, I don't want to go into details. That's not important. In Delhi, in a case which is so much talked about, it took 1 year for DNA analysis. It is a shame. In this day and age, 1 year for DNA analysis. It happens within 24 hours anywhere in the world. All of India does about 2,000 cases of DNA analysis. Each case requires 5-6 samples. The total samples analyzed in India, DNA analysis, is about 12,000 in a year. which is ridiculous. Just to give one example, we have no forensic capability. So crime investigation in most cases is taking an accused who is poor and weak and without influence, beat the hell out of him, and the fellow confesses. How can that be crime investigation in the modern world? And the poor people often confess for fear of being beaten up. They are the ones who go to jails. So it's wrong on every count. So forensics. Then independent and effective prosecution. We have a very small number of prosecutors. They are all politically appointed. Most of them are pretty below par. There's a whole way of transforming prosecution and bringing it under some kind of a quasi-judicial supervision. And then judges' substandard quality I mentioned. Bring in Indian judicial service. If there is one case for All India service, it's judicial service, because there's a lot of fascination for All India services in India. All of you want to appear for those examinations. Use that as an opportunity and get the finest talent into judiciary through Indian judicial service. So that's the easiest way of populating judiciary with better quality of people. So a series of steps, systematic, practical, doable steps we have to take. There's no one silver bullet. It's too complicated in everything.
So my question is related to the historical era. So we have been talking about the equality thing. So equality in healthcare, if we go gender-wise, I would leave apart the men and women thing. I just wanted to ask about the equality of the transgenders who identify themselves as transgenders in India. We have roughly 4 to 5 million people. So what about their utilization and access to the healthcare? Because what I feel and believe is the doctors and the staffs of the healthcare, it depends on their behavior and their perspective of treating a transgender, of seeing a transgender as a patient of themselves. So depending on their behavior and the kind of thing they are doing with them, so the transgenders feel a kind of stigma as well as the restriction from the healthcare providers. That's why they are not able to access and utilize the healthcare settings. So what solutions we should come up with so that the transgenders also feel that the healthcare is equally available and utilizable for them?
Mostly, I'm not an expert on transgender issues, therefore I cannot speak with any authority. But on a broader point, if healthcare in general is available to most of the people and is of good quality, if one section is not getting access, then we have to look at it. But as a rule, if healthcare is not available to most of the people most of the time, the problem is much bigger than sectional problem. Today, for instance, there is hardly any primary care worth mentioning. Let me give you some statistics. Typically, world over, an individual on an average requires at least 2 to 4 outpatient visits to a doctor. There are global norms. We have statistics. In India, the number of outpatient visits to a doctor are about 0.5, and a substantial number of them are to an unqualified quack. Rural India, 50 to 60% of the visits to a so-called healthcare worker, you can't call him a doctor, or to a quack, rural, unqualified, informal, rural medical practitioner. So the problem is not of one section or the other. It's a universal problem of India. There is no primary care. So what's happening? Problems are allowed to fester. Even if you have something like Arogyasri, until it becomes a hospital care problem and an emergency, you don't address it. You convert it into an emergency, or you suffer silently, sometimes die, or suffer irretrievable damage. And as a result, in big cities, take your Usmania Hospital or Gandhi Hospital, 4 to 6,000 outpatients come a day. AIMS, India's Apex Institute, 12,000 outpatients a day, world's highest number. In fact, every hospital in India would have the world's highest number. The only other hospitals with higher number would be other Indian hospitals. Because there's no primary care system, everybody goes to a teaching hospital. It's absurd. Your completely misutilizing resources, misallocating resources. Problems get festered, lifespans are reduced, cost gets escalated. A simple problem not addressed properly becomes a costly problem, addressed with great difficulty, and so on and so forth. So our healthcare crisis is not about a segment of population. Certainly, in our society, because of taboos, and perhaps other societies too, AIDS patients for a long time, the taboos were there. So a lot of effort is made with some success. Earlier, even tuberculosis taboo is there. STDs taboos are there. Transgender, I'm sure taboos are there. We have to address them. But when the problem is universal, first fix the universal problem of access and quality and resources and technology. Then look at sectional problems with the aid of experts. We require competent social workers, psychologists, and others to overcome the taboos. I'm not an expert in this field, but the way I look at it is the bigger challenge must be addressed before looking at sectional challenges. Because this challenge affects everybody in India.
సార్ నా క్వశ్చన్ అనేది హెల్త్ కేర్ సంబంధించింది. సార్ ప్రస్తుతం ఇప్పుడు రోజులు చూసుకుంటే గవర్నమెంట్ హాస్పిటల్స్ మెరుగైన సేవలు అందించక గవర్నమెంట్స్ ఏం చేస్తున్నాయంటే ప్రైవేట్ ఇన్స్టిట్యూషన్స్ ఒక హెల్ప్ తీసుకుంటున్నాయి జనరల్గా. అంటే మీరు సర్వీసెస్ అందించండి, మేము దానికి ఎంతైతే ఖర్చు అవుతుందో మేము దానికి ఇచ్చేస్తాము అనేసి. సో ఇప్పుడు సిచ్యువేషన్ ఎలాగొచ్చిందంటే ఎక్కడైనా ఒక యాక్సిడెంట్ అయినా సరే 100 మీటర్స్లో ఉన్న గవర్నమెంట్ హాస్పిటల్కి ఉన్నా లేదు 500 మీటర్స్ దూరంలో ఉన్న ప్రైవేట్ హాస్పిటల్కే వెళ్దాం అనే సిచ్యువేషన్ వరకు మనం వస్తుంది. దీన్ని ఏమన్నాలి సార్? అంటే ఇప్పుడు గవర్నమెంట్స్ని అడిగితే మేము ప్రజలకి ఇంకా మెరుగైన సేవలు అందించాలనే దీంతోనే మేము ఇలా చేసాము అని అంటున్నారు. అంటే అవి మాటలు అంటే కవర్ చేసుకుంటున్నారు అంటే ఒక రకంగా చెప్పాలంటే. సో దీన్ని ఎలా మనం ట్రీట్ చేయాలి? అంటే గవర్నమెంట్ ఫెయిల్యూర్ అనుకోవాలా, లేదంటే పాస్ట్ ఎక్స్పీరియన్స్ బట్టి ఇది ఒక కొత్త డిజైన్ అనుకోవాలా, లేకపోతే ఏమనుకోవాలి?
It's a very good question. I couldn't get your name.
సార్ భువన్ సాయి.
Bhuvan. Thank you, Bhuvan. See, when public institutions are allowed to decay for a long period of time, there are no easy solutions. When I went to medical school, I joined medicine exactly 50 years ago this week. I don't remember the exact date. I suspect it was 15th April, I think I joined. Exactly 50, that's how old I am. When I went to medical school, the public hospitals were the best hospitals in the country. My teaching hospital was the best hospital in those 2-3 districts. There was nothing comparable. The best experts were there. The most reputed doctors were there. Today, it's no longer true. Even in a teaching hospital, let alone other government hospitals, you rarely can say so-and-so is the best expert. Even if the person is reasonably good, he is about somewhere low in the order of merit. Definitely not number one. And rarely are they even in the order of merit at all. Because the best talent is not going to government in these professions. Because their market is providing opportunities, and not only money, but also better opportunities, the working environment, the flexibility, the freedom, the opportunity to excel, establish global benchmarks and meet the global benchmarks, get a reputation. Government is no longer providing those opportunities. You made it a very soulless bureaucracy. So I'd much rather go somewhere, a center of excellence, where Nageshwar Reddy is a global expert, where Gopi Chand is a world-class cardiothoracic surgeon, where Gopal Murugan is a world-class valve replacement man, or where some other doctor is a world-class man. So you would like to work with those people. You don't want to work in government where mediocre fellows are there, your talents cannot flower, you cannot improve your skills, you cannot gain a reputation. There's no interest. So best people are fleeing. So governments now have a cruel choice. Do I wait until I improve the public systems? It will not happen overnight. And do I go to private sector? I think a judicious combination is required. And here is my answer. Primary care, that means the first point of contact with a doctor, cannot be improved through government system alone, but cannot be also given by private sector in the current manner. The best way is what Britain is doing, but with certain modifications. You encourage the bright young doctors to practice as family practitioners in small towns with a local population in the neighboring villages, let's say 100,000 population. Encourage 10 such people to come in voluntarily. They're all private practitioners. You establish a a mechanism by which the outpatient costs are met by the government. The diagnostic arrangements are made. Everything in detail is available. Whatever I'm saying, there's literature. Actually, FDR released a detailed roadmap for healthcare transformation in India. It's available. You can buy it, you can download it free, and then you can read it, you can do whatever you want. It's available. So, let the patients have choice and let there be competition. It's not one government doctor given salary by somebody. These are all private practitioners dedicated to family care, funded by government on the basis of the outpatients they see. So only when I go to a doctor because I trust that doctor will a doctor get practice. The more patients he can see, the more money he gets. And I choose among the 10 available people within 10-15 kilometers from my village. So that kind of a model, giving the doctor a decent income, because after that kind of very high quality training of some of the finest people, you give them peanuts and you want to get good health care, you are being silly. You want to pay 500 rupees for a silly film, you don't want to pay 300 rupees for a doctor? How can it work? How can the system work? You get mediocre fellows. You get substandard care. So all this is accommodated in the model I've prepared. And this is affordable. There's no problem. Don't worry about the cost. And simultaneously diagnostics and medicines. So primary care, this model. Private sector with public funding with competition and choice. Secondary care, the present Aarogyasri model with some modifications. Aarogyasri basically is a collective risk pooling mechanism where the government is funding the hospital care costs for the poor people. Instead of making it only poor, because anyway 70-80% we're giving, make it universal. And exclude all the tertiary care problems, high-end care problems. Include all other secondary care problems. Don't have any, only exclusion list. Otherwise, every hospital care problem is addressed in Aarogyasri. So Aarogyasri model with such modifications is enough. And make it more centered on small nursing homes. I don't want to go into too many details, but secondary care, the present model with some modifications enough. Tertiary care is the challenge where public versus private comes. What we should move towards is progressively build your public hospital, teaching hospitals capability. The equipment, the funding, the governance model, accountability structure, autonomy, and attracting the finest talent from private sector. The best doctors, if they're in private sector, you can't take them into government. They will not come for government jobs. But they will certainly come as honorary professors if you provide a package to them so that they can practice here. But more attractive thing for them is to teach. Every great doctor wants to be a teacher. To be a professor in a medical college is a matter of great honor world over. That is the hook. They want to teach. You encourage them. Ask them to give X number of hours in the government hospital practice as consultants. Give flexible models. They go do their private practice. Most of the work is there, but they do this work and they teach. So that we can use them now. If Nageshwar is available in a government hospital, I attract patients. If Gopichand is available in a government hospital, I attract patients. If Gopal Murugan is available, I attract patients. These some of the names I'm mentioning are some of the best in the country and the world, trust me. We have them. In every city in India, we have them. Luckily, earlier we didn't have them. So bring those people in. And over time, not immediately, the tertiary care, highly sophisticated, costly problems, you make it only in government hospitals, because otherwise, private hospital tertiary care will jack up the cost dramatically without improving outcomes. That's the nature of tertiary care. Technology is improving. The benefits are marginal. Cost is extraordinary. For an individual patient, however costly it is, if my life is at stake, I say 1 crore is okay, it's worthwhile. But society cannot afford that, right? So society ultimately must decide what can be done, what cannot be done. What can be done, do it well, at the least possible cost with the best efficacy. But in public hospitals, private hospitals cannot bring down the cost for a variety of reasons. So you must have a graded model. It's not public or private, that stage is too far gone. Publicly funded, most efficient model at the least cost but best outcomes, and with public-private participation. A nuanced model, there's no one shoe fit model. I don't believe that India is all going down the drain, everything is bad, it's all terrible. There are some aspects of India which are terrible, that can be easily improved. There are some aspects of India which are improving significantly, which should take pride and accelerate that process. There are some areas which are not being improved that are much harder. We are not even debating that. If you have a generally bleak approach that people don't follow rules, Indian people are bad only, which is not true. Indian people have a lot more common sense. When demonetization took place, even if it was done very badly, people of India, did they resist? Because they trusted the government, they felt they're doing for a good cause. However painful it was, people accepted it. It's a tribute to Indian people. When the lockdown was imposed on India, without preparation and without allowing the people to go back to their homes, when people had to walk hundreds of kilometers in hot sun and suffer without food, did the people rebel? It was done hastily but good intentions. When vaccination was, people were asked to take vaccination. Did anti-vaccine movements come about in India? No. In the large part, Indian people are very sensible. They are commonsensical. They follow leadership. Provided they see some sense in what is being done, and provided they have some trust, some confidence in the leadership. Is it unreasonable to expect these two? Some sense in what I'm asked to do and some faith in you. Is it too much to ask? So I don't think people of India are a problem. If you want all people to behave as angels all times, then why do you require governments by? Why do you require law? Human society created government and law because all people do not behave like angels. That is human nature. Now let us not use human nature as an excuse for government's failure. You created government because of human nature. Don't use human nature as an excuse. You failed. It's not the people that have failed. So don't be confused. Indian people are amenable to discipline. If you are not enforcing some simple rules, why are people disobeying traffic rules? Because nobody is enforcing the rules. And the other day, the tamasha of saying 90% or 75% of the fines are waived if you pay now. What is this? You can say that about other things, not about penal offences. What is the signal you are sending? It's terrible. So it is the failure of governance, not the failure of the people. Despite our poverty and illiteracy and caste system and many social disadvantages, on the whole, Indian people are much more sensible than the rest of the world, I can assure you. Whether it's the families, are amenable to leadership, or commonsensical points, they don't unnecessarily resist. They don't carry the principle of individual freedom beyond a point. They have an innate compass. They have common sense, which is a guide. We are not like America, where you say, I won't have vaccines. It's my birthright. You don't hear any Indian saying that. So don't blame Indian people. That's a lazy way and a wrong way. You talked about price rise. Again, it's a bleak picture. I'm a glass half full kind of a guy. You are completely wrong on that. Look at two issues. The global price of petrol and diesel and the oil went up by 100% in the last 3 months. The retail price of the gas stations world over went up by 50 to 60%. It went up by 10% in India. We are all shouting from rooftops. Is it fair? Tell me. You want to go for an ice cream, you want to take a scooter or a car for 10 kilometers, and you want somebody else to pay the cost? When the purchase cost is very high and you are polluting the environment, and precious foreign exchange is sold, is expended, is it fair? So we are somehow thinking that government is God and can do whatever they want. You are buying the damn crude oil. World over prices went up by 55% in the last 1 month. Do you know that? In India, they went up by 10%. Take a bigger picture. You're all young people who should care for the environment and your own future. If you don't go for a non-oil economy, non-fossil fuel economy in the next 20, 30 years, your generation and your next generations are finished. How are you going to go there unless you create an incentive? If I have to go for electric car, if I have to go for solar power, other things, I must create incentives. I must make the alternative, the fossil fuel based power, costly. Suppose the electric car in the market, an electric car where 1 unit will give about 10-15 kilometers, 1 rupee 1 kilometer. A motor car gives you even at 14 kilometers or 18 kilometers of mileage, it costs you about 6 or 7 rupees. So unless the differential is maintained, why will I go for electric car? Just to give an example. So there's also a price incentive for you to change behavior. You cannot want a better society, better world, better ecology, better future for future generations, moral society, environmentally friendly society, and then say I don't want to pay the minimum cost in order to change incentives. That is being hypocritical. Let me be blunt. We become a bunch of hypocrites in this country, politically and otherwise. You must examine each policy separately and carefully. Don't take a universal line. Whatever is done is bad, whatever is done good because you like a party, don't like a party. That's a silly idiot's approach. You are enlightened, intelligent citizens. Appreciate the nuances, the right and wrong. What is wrong, you fight. What is right, you support. You are not slaves of this party or that party. I honestly don't see what is wrong with 110 rupees petrol. In fact, it will be 125 to 130 in the next month. I can assure you. There is no choice. Unless the Ukraine war ends, Putin makes peace, or his successor comes, makes peace with the world, all those things happen, it will go to 125, 130 rupees. Anything less than that is not sustainable. If that's what the price is, that's what the price is. Go by public transport, use a bicycle, use a scooter, do carpooling, do whatever it takes. Don't indulge in bad practices that are hurting society and then complain against the government. We also have an obligation as human beings. Governments are not gods. They can't solve the problems of energy. Narendra Modi or KCR or Jagan or Joe Biden or somebody else has no solution to global problems unless societies come together. Unless they change their behavior. And we blame them. Global warming, blame President or Prime Minister. What are you doing? What am I doing? What does he have? Does he have a Mantraganda? Is he a Lord Vishnu come in Vishnu Rupa and then change everything overnight? He has nothing. The only tools are people, taxation, policies. What else can he do? So, think. Please think. Don't have a bleak view of the world. Don't have a romantic view of the world. The world is a combination of both good and bad. Not everything is bad. I see so many wonderful things happening. I prefer to see them rather than the bad things. The world is getting to be a better place, not a worse place. But it's not getting to be a much better place than it is. It could be far better than what it is. There's a long way to go. That's what should spur us into action. But we should not be dispirited thinking that the world is getting into a bad place. The world is not getting into a bad place. You ask your parents and your grandparents, unless they are certifiably insane, they will not say the world 30 years ago, 50 years ago was much better. If they say that, these are the fulminations of old people. Utterly irresponsible talk, irrational talk. The world was a terrible place 30 years ago and 50 years ago. There was no electricity. As a district magistrate, you know how much I used to suffer during hot summers? 14 hours a day traveling in the hot sun. As a principal, I refused to have air conditioning for my car because it was not sanctioned. In my office, I refused air conditioning because that will distance people from me. In any case, most of the time power was out. You know how much we suffered? As an IAS officer, I didn't have a telephone. You have to make a trunk call. 20 kilometers, you have to make a trunk call and wait. If you think world earlier was better and world today is terrible, then you have no sense of history at all. The world is infinitely better than it was, but it can be much better than what it is today. There's a long way to go. That is the right perspective. Don't think everything is bad, everything is Satyanash. That is nihilism. That is untrue. The world is getting better. You should be grateful. You should be happy as people born in this time and this age. This is the best of all possible ages. But we can get much better. If in this age people are raped and murdered, it's a shame, it's a tragedy. We should do something about it. If in this age there was so much pollution, we should do something about it. But the world is not getting bad. It's getting better. But my appeal is, education is a powerful tool to understand issues and find solutions. That is what true education is. Education is not about the gift of the gab, making slogans and irresponsible statements. We must be a part of the solution. You cannot be a part of the problem. Sloganeering is not solution. Solution is solution. Evidence, logic, best practices, innovation, solution, ability to execute and understand the problems and then find the corrective path. That is the way to progress in every single human endeavor.
అందరికీ నమస్కారం. మీ అందరికీ ధన్యవాదాలు తెలిపే ముందు ఒక చిన్న మాట. మార్చి 20వ తారీఖు అంటే పోయిన నెల 20వ తారీఖు ఉస్మానియా యూనివర్సిటీలో ఆర్ట్స్ కాలేజ్, అక్కడ నిజాం నవాబు కట్టించినటువంటి ఆ రాతి బిల్డింగ్ ఉంది కదా, ఆర్ట్స్ కాలేజ్, దాంట్లో ఒక సెమినార్ జరిగింది. తెలుగు సాహిత్యానికి సంబంధించి ఒక సెమినార్ జరిగింది. ఆ సెమినార్కు నేను కూడా హాజరైనా. మేమంతా సమయానికంటే ముందే పోయి అక్కడ కూర్చున్నాం. అక్కడ వేదిక మీద హెచ్ఓడి గారు, హెడ్ ఆఫ్ ద డిపార్ట్మెంట్ ప్రొఫెసర్ కాసిం గారు కూర్చున్నారు. మేమంతా ఒక 50-60 మంది అక్కడ ఉన్నాం. మీ అందరినీ ఒక్కొక్కరు లేచి మీ పేరు చెప్పి పరిచయం చేసుకోండి అని చెప్పి ఆయన అన్నారు. అందరు లేచి ఒక్కొక్కరు పేరు చెప్పి పరిచయం చేసుకుంటున్నారు. అందులో ఒక 25 సంవత్సరాల ఒక పిల్లగాడు లేచి నా పేరు జయప్రకాష్ నారాయణ అన్న. అందరూ కొంచెం ఆశ్చర్యంగా చూస్తున్నారు. అక్కడ కూర్చున్న హెచ్ఓడి గారేమో నా వైపు చూస్తున్నారు. ఎందుకంటే నేను లోక్సత్తా తోటి అసోసియేట్ అయ్యి ఉన్నాను కాబట్టి నాకు తెలిసిన మనిషి ఏమనుకుంటున్నారు. కానీ మళ్ళీ సార్ అడిగారు అనమాట, హెచ్ఓడి గారు, బాబు లోక్నాయక్ జేపీ గారి పేరా మీకు పెట్టింది అని చెప్పి ఆయన అడిగాడు. లేదు సార్, లోక్నాయక్ జేపీ ఎవరు కూడా మాకు తెలియదు. యాక్చువల్గా లోక్సత్తా జేపీ గారు ఆయన ఐఏఎస్కి రాజీనామా చేసి, ప్రభుత్వానికి రాజీనామా చేసి బయటకు వచ్చిన సందర్భంలో 1996లో నేను పుట్టాను. మా నాన్న అప్పటికే డిగ్రీ చదువుకొని కొద్దిగా ఎడ్యుకేటెడ్గా ఉన్నారు. నాకు ఆ సార్ పేరు నాకు పెట్టిండు అని అట్లా తెలియదు. ఒక మనిషికి జీవితకాలంలో ఏం కావాలి ఇంతకంటే? పోతన ఒక మాట అంటాడు, కారే రాజులు రాజ్యములు కలగవే గర్వోన్నతి పొందరే వారేరిన్ సిరిన్ మూటం కట్టుకొని పోవంజాలిరే పృథ్వీపై పేరైనాంగలదే శిబి ప్రముఖులను బ్రీతిన్ యశ కాములై కారే కోరికలు భార్గవ అని చెప్పి యూత్ ఫెస్టివల్కి సంబంధించిన పోస్టర్. అందరినీ రావాల్సిందే కోరుతున్న యూత్ YISS సభ్యులు కానీ కార్యకర్తలు